They're a group that we call first wave consumers. They buy their first houses, their first cars, they form families for the first time, and all the consumption that's associated with that. What we need to understand is that they've been absent from the economy over the last 7 years. Now, they haven't been completely absent, but their participation rates have continued to fall over that period of time, and that's a phenomenon we hardly ever see in any economy. You pick on the U.S. economy, it's taken millions out of the labor force over that period of time. Well, when you don't have that first wave consumption there, you don't have the pressures inside of the market that keep everything buoyant. Now what we are seeing is that that is actually turning around dramatically for the first time in 7 years. And we're very excited about what these millennials will actually bring into the marketplace. The demand for housing, the demand for consumer goods, demand for vehicles and so forth. Very energizing for the overall economy. When the economy plunged in 2008, all of a sudden, a number of structural inhibitors cropped up. You could talk about fiscal policy around the world, particularly in Western Europe. You can talk about the global banking sector as well, and how fragile that was at the time, and it's still very much under repair. You can talk about an enormous overhang of public debt inside of the Japanese market. They're just, their numbers are so exaggerated over anybody else's on the planet. You can talk about the financial irregularities inside of the Chinese economy. It's very opaque. Any one of these things could be a key inhibitor to growth going forward. But the interesting thing is, if growth is about to do a turnaround, well, on the flip side, growth is a great elixir for these problems. There's not a single one of these structural inhibitors that actually cannot be healed by a turnaround in overall global growth. We think that there's an aggressive wave of growth that's actually coming our way. And if that is the case, boy, it's going to make life a whole lot easier in terms of all of these structural factors. With international trade firing up and commodity prices coming off of their extreme lows in early 2016, we have an industrial spectrum inside of Canada that is actually doing very well. It's also bumping up against some fairly extreme capacity issues in certain industries. And so we see positives for oil and gas. They can make money at current levels. The technology for that was actually determined back in 1986. They had a big crisis back then. Marginal recoverable was $40 a barrel. World prices plunged at that time to somewhere between $20 and $25 a barrel, and they stayed that way for 15 years. So that industry was done if they did not have a technological revolution. Well, they had that technological revolution, and they were able to lower those marginal recoverable rates or prices from $40 down to $12. And they were able to make lots of money at $20 to $25. And so that technology still exists today. And even although, the overall costs have gone up over time, they're still very low. And so today at $50 oil companies can make money. The metal spectrum, exactly the same story for them. So the mining complex in general, we believe, is one that is still marching ahead, doing well, not as well as it did, but that party couldn't last forever. What about the other parts of the industrial spectrum? Well, given the constraints that we see in the auto sector in the United States, we believe that investment in Canada is going to be decent as we go forward. Not so much in the assemblers, but in the parts industry. We're doing very well in the United States, in Mexico, and around the world, and we do believe that investment is going to continue there. One last one that I will say is the agri-food complex. This is one that is incredibly exciting as we go forward. When we look at Food and Agriculture Organization numbers prepared by the UN on needs in emerging markets going forward, we see a net dependency in certain areas. Let's just take pork in China, for example. Their net dependency on the rest of the world right now is growing somewhere between a 15 and 21% rate of growth every year on a compound basis. Let those numbers sink in. there's very little else on the planet that is growing steadily by that every year. So if you're in that marketplace, that's the growth rate that you get automatically. If you can add market share, it's even more aggressive than that. Well, we're a breadbasket nation. We do things like pork. We have lots of crops here. We process food here. And the demands from China and from the emerging markets in general over the next 20 to 30 years are going to be extremely aggressive. This is all driven by the growth of the emerging market middle class. And China's middle class is growing by Canadian population every year. I mean, the statistics just get more eye-popping as you go along. There is no end to this demand as we see it. Canada is very well positioned to take advantage of this. Well, business has woken up to that. Government understands it as well. The Council for Growth, headed by McKinsey global head Dominic Barton, a Canadian, has actually written a report on this. And so there's a tremendous amount of emphasis on this. And we believe that construction is needed, is going to be needed over the next long while to actually facilitate this growth.